Streaming live on WFLA Now. Powered by 1-800-ASK-GARY.
3.5 weeks later, a killer still on the loose after 4 University of Idaho students savagely stabbed to death in the middle of the night, with police pressed for answers from a frightened community. Many wondering, is the case going cold as investigators work around the clock to try to provide answers? Good afternoon to you folks. JB here with you live on WFLA Now. Of course, we are talking about the stabbing deaths of 4 University of Idaho students. We have been talking, of course, about Ethan Chapin, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, and Kaylee Goncalves, all, of course, 20 or 21 years old. A tragic story that has been unfolding at the University of Idaho. And as we cover this story, and you just heard there in our package from News Nation's Brian Enton, and Brian Enton will be joining us in about 20 minutes from now for kind of the latest as where things stand here today, this Wednesday. You heard him say that investigators are hoping that witnesses come forward with information, that witnesses provide something that will be the break in the case. But what if witnesses don't ever provide that break in the case? What if witnesses don't have the information that police are desperately seeking, investigators desperately seeking to provide justice to these 4 families and to the University of Idaho community? What if evidence is really going to be the key to this case? Well, great that we have experts from the University of South Florida joining us here live on stream. Professors Peter Massey and Thomas Heislip joining us, taking time out of their day to join us. And Peter and Thomas have very specific focuses and different focuses, and that's why it's great to have them both here on the live stream. Good afternoon to you both, gentlemen. Peter, why don't we begin with you? Explain to our audience here your background and what your special focus is when it comes to the very, very vast field of forensic sciences.
Sure. Thank you for having us. My background is I was law enforcement for 20 years. 10 of that was processing crime scenes. My educational background is in forensic science, so I kind of mix both the scientific aspect of it as well as the scene aspect of it.
Terrific. Thomas, yourself?
Yeah, hi, JB. I spent 23 years with the federal government, split between the Secret Service and the Department of Defense as a special agent. And for 22 of those years, I focused on cybercrime investigation and digital forensics. And that's what I now teach at the University of South Florida.
I'm sure that both of you have been following this case with great interest, because really folks and experts in the field of forensic sciences have been following this case across the country. You don't have to be in Idaho, of course, to know about the stabbing deaths of the 4 University of Idaho students. Let me just give you both the opportunity. I'll throw you both up here on screen to speak in general about what you think of the case at this particular stage as we approach now a month with a killer still on the loose. Thomas, why don't we start with you?
All right, thanks, JB. I think my impression initially and now is that, and Peter can speak more of this in a moment, the traditional forensics, there may not be the smoking gun at the scene, and that's why it's taken a while. But the digital forensics will hopefully lead to potential clues that can lead to a suspect or hopefully an arrest.
Peter, you've been following the case, I'm sure, to an extent. What can you provide as far as what you've been witnessing here from the University of South Florida?
Well, 2 things. One is obviously, we care about the families. We understand that the trauma that they're going through. But from the forensic side, what we need to understand is it takes time to run these examinations at the laboratory. There are other crimes or other cases that are coming in, so we still have to deal with that as far as the laboratory goes. So in time, we're going to get some answers, but it is going to take some time.
I'm very grateful to have you both because, again, going back to what I was just talking about, ideally, in a perfect world, a witness comes forward, sees something, a friend, a family member, somebody has some key piece of information that breaks the case. But if it doesn't shake out that way, as so many other cases do, if it actually does come down to the evidence, it could be physical evidence, which, of course, Peter, you are an expert in as far as crime scene and crime scene reconstruction. Thomas, you're going to be able to speak to us a little bit about digital evidence. And in addition, that body camera video that I'm going to ask you about here in a minute from the 911 call that came overnight. But I want to bring up some video here. This is video from the you're about to see it play here on your screen from the crime labs in Idaho, the state crime labs. 113 pieces of evidence have been collected, or I believe more than 113 pieces of evidence now. When it comes to Peter processing what has been described at great length as a very complex and difficult crime scene, you're talking about a 3-level residence, not just a residence that is home to, of course, the people that live there, but as far as Ethan Chapin's relationship, him being the boyfriend, of course, of one of the students as well. And then, of course, it's a college residence. You have people coming and going, people coming over either to study or to party, have a good time, to play video games, whatever it might be. A lot of traffic coming in there. So in your estimation, how complex of a crime scene do you believe this to be?
Oh, this is going to be amazing. The amount of work that needs to be done by the law enforcement community in this case is overwhelming. You have at least 3 separate crime scenes that need to be processed, if not the vehicles, anything else that came out of there. So it's going to take a long time to finish. The other thing that you mentioned there, JB, was it's a college home. There are people coming and going all the time. When we start to look at biological evidence, the information is it foreign or has that person been to that house before? And that's something that the investigators are going to have to filter out.
Let me ask you this. You just mentioned a little bit how long it's going to take, Peter, to process this evidence. There's obviously, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but there's a tremendous, immense amount of pressure on multiple law enforcement agencies to produce results. There's also something we're going to talk about a little bit later on about how there's been this perceived fracture as far as the trust between law enforcement and the community and the families of the victims here. We'll get into all that in a little bit. But people, I think we live in a world where people want answers sooner rather than later. It's been described by some in the field of forensic sciences as the CSI effect, where you watch TV shows and you see how quickly it can all unfold within an hour with commercial breaks. It's not that simple as far as the timeline, of course, you know, but as far as this complicated crime scene and it being that complex, what could be the time frame here? Are we talking weeks, months, years to sift through all this evidence and to actually process it and have it organized to the point where you could yield results from it?
Well, I think realistically, months would be an appropriate time frame, not weeks. If we get into the years, then we're talking about a cold case and we need a lot more information going forward. I'm not so sure we're going to get to that point, but it is going to take time, and people need to understand that law enforcement wants to solve this case yesterday just as well as the community does. But they're also responsible for doing it the right way, knowing that ultimately this may end up in a courtroom and the I's have to be dotted, the T's have to be crossed. And as you said, JB, the community is much more attuned to all of this type of investigation because of television, media, and the such.
Let me take the same question over to you, Thomas, because obviously the processing and analyzing of physical evidence versus digital evidence, there's obviously so many different factors at play. But we know that there are probably mountains of digital evidence, most of it probably, I'm sure, circled on each one of the victims' phones. And also, too, I'm sure if there's any persons of interest, and we have to be very, very careful with labels, because when it comes to suspects, persons of interest, there isn't really anything tangible to go on in this case based on what, of course, investigators are saying. But when it comes to these phones, social media activity, cell phone pings, is it realistic as far as expecting results sooner than physical evidence, or is that incorrect to think that way?
It's incorrect to think that way, JB. You can get some quick, immediate results on some minor things. So if you had the device, like a cell phone, you can look at the email, the text, the social media post. But to look at it in a bigger picture, it's going to take months, the same as what Peter said for the physical evidence. And a lot of that comes down to, if you think about the digital footprint, was a term we teach. Everything you do online, you're leaving breadcrumbs and potential evidence. We have to collect all that and put it together. Well, to collect that, you have to get court orders, subpoenas, search warrants to multiple entities, to the ISPs, to the email providers, to the cell phone providers. Get the court order, send the court order, get the return back from the company, and then analyze it. And they can take weeks to a month to get that data back to you. And so you're waiting on that data to come back, the data you don't have immediately on a device. And so, yeah, months is a realistic time frame.
So similar to waiting on DNA test results. It's not just because it's digital and just because technology has advanced so mightily over the last couple of decades. It's not instantaneous. They could still be going through digital evidence even well beyond Christmas, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, they could be waiting on digital evidence from, say, an email provider, right? You have the immediate email on the phone, but all the emails not on the phone. There could be, stuff stored in the servers, and you have to send a search warrant to that email provider to get that data from them, and they can still be waiting to receive that data and not even have it yet. And then when they get it, it takes time to analyze it. And if they're doing that for multiple accounts, from email to social media, you got to ingest all that, analyze it, do it properly. It takes a long time. And
that's something I've always wondered. With how high profile of a case, this is without question the most high profile murder investigation in the country right now. If you are a cellular provider with particular data on the cell phone and ping locations, if you have forensic data on an email, or if you're a social media giant like TikTok or Facebook or Twitter and you have this information, do investigators have an ability to expedite the process to get some of that data back faster from some of these private companies that aren't in the public sector, like getting back data from, let's say, TikTok or Twitter or something to that effect? How can they speed up the process, or can they not?
Well, you can ask and hope that they'll, because it's such a high profile case, that they'll get it to you sooner, but you can't make that, right? I mean, the law is clear. They respond in their time frame. But usually they're pretty good about it. Something this high profile, they're going to turn it around quickly for you, move it to the front of the line. The problem is, you identify one of the suspects' emails, you request that information, you get that back, and then you go through those emails. And when you go through those emails, you say you identify 6 other email addresses of other individuals. So wait, we got to collect these 2 because these are unknown, or there's some potential clues in there. Now you got to send 6 more search warrants to their email providers and collect their data, and it just keeps, every step is another time delay.
Let me bring everybody back on screen here for a second. You see the hashtags around your screen. We're going to be trying to take as many questions and comments as possible on this live stream for about another 5 to 10 minutes while we have Peter and while we have Thomas. We also have Brian Enton, of course, standing by. I'll ask our moderators, of course, on our social media platforms to, again, encourage our hashtag system as far as getting a comment displayed on screen. Before we start to go to some of the comments, we have a few on Twitter here coming in as well. Peter, I want to ask you about one particular note that I find very interesting. No broken windows at the residence, no signs of forced entry or busted door. What does that inform you as a crime scene expert, a crime scene reconstruction expert, about what transpired the night of November 12th and November 13th at this residence in Idaho?
Well, one thing that comes to mind is, having been to college, we rocked our doors. We didn't leave our doors unlocked. So there was access 24/7 back in the day. I tend to think that, again, college kids live that way as well. They don't lock things up. and you're in Moscow, Idaho, you're not in some high crime-ridden location. So I could see the tone being lowered in that regard. On the other side, if that's not the case and nothing was left open, then it obviously is indicative of somebody who knew somebody in that house and was freely admitted into that home.
We have a question coming in from Brittany on Twitter, and it says hashtag Hey JB. I don't know exactly what she means by releasing, but she says, when does law enforcement plan on releasing the crime scene? And I guess what she means by that, right now there's still, crime scene tape up around the house. It is still obviously an extremely important asset as far as the investigation is concerned. But a lot of questions, of course, pertaining to the house. What do we say for Brittany's question?
Well, look, unfortunately, there's no time when the answer is going to be when they're done and when they've checked and double checked and triple checked. You brought up, JB, this is a high profile case right now. Everybody's eyes are looking on it. So as far as the investigators go, they also have eyes being viewed upon them. So they're going to check to make sure that all their evidence is collected. Like Thomas said, if you jump down that rabbit hole, maybe they're finding some sort of biological evidence there and they need to go back into the house. As long as they hold that house, the search warrant is good. If they give up the house, they have to go back and get another search warrant to get back into the house for additional evidence. So the short answer is when they're done.
Peter, we're looking here at video of the vehicles getting towed away recently in the last week. Also, as well at video that I think you're going to see here in just a moment of brown bags being taken, I think just in the last several days. They're still obviously collecting evidence from the house. Does that surprise you 3 weeks after the murders took place, or is that kind of status quo for forensic investigators?
It is surprising that it is this long. But as I said, they're double checking everything. This is such a high profile case right now. We have such young individuals who have been brutally attacked and killed. So again, it's a matter of doing it the right way. When they're done, they're done.
Yeah, Love is asking here, Love a Scorpio, hashtag HJB, why weren't the cars taken off the property immediately? Peter, do you have any ideas as to why the cars were left? I mean, it might not be a primary focus of the investigation, at least in the immediate aftermath of the bodies being discovered in the house, but do you have any answer as to why the cars it was so late as far as them removing it from the property?
Yeah, I think go along with exactly what you said. That's not the primary scene. The primary scenes were inside. So there's really no rush to pull those vehicles out. I don't know whether they did some investigating inside before it looks like the snow came. If they did anything at the scene, or if everything was towed out and investigated, at an impound lot or a secure facility. But there's really no rush for that.
Let's continue to ask for your questions and comments on screen as we have, again, Peter Massey, Thomas Heislip joining us from the University of South Florida, forensic experts in different ways. Peter focusing on crime scenes, Thomas focusing on digital forensics and cyber crimes. Let me ask you guys this question as far as the amount of pressure that is on investigators at this stage. Social media, online sleuthing, all a component in how people are analyzing this, and in doing so in real time. How difficult is it for the forensic investigators and really just detectives in general to be able to tunnel vision and focus in on just the task at hand while blocking out all the outside noise? And when I say outside noise, I'm not even just talking about people tweeting and people sharing TikTok videos. I'm talking about even, members of the victims' families have been very critical in not getting more answers from law enforcement. There not being this open channel of communication. They have spoke in interviews with News Nation and some other media outlets saying that they are frustrated with this process and how tight-lipped it has been. So all the pressure, all the noise, all of the criticisms that are taking place and coming in from multiple directions, is it difficult to block out the noise, or are you so honed in on the task at hand that you're just focusing on getting justice for these families? Thomas, why don't we start with you?
You can block out the noise, as you say, from, say, third parties on Twitter, but the problem where you get the pressure as an investigator is from your internal agency, the government, the district attorney's office. You have elected officials you're reporting to, and eventually, off the chain, they're getting a lot of pressure, and then it comes down to you, and they're looking for you to solve this as quick as possible. And well, you can stay focused and work your case that the way it needs to be worked. You're well aware that everything you do is being watched, and the pressure is on because your bosses are getting pressure from the political people above them. So it causes, it's a challenge. You just have to stay the course, because the one thing you can't do, and Peter mentioned it early, and this is on any investigation, but especially something this high profile, you get pressure and you make a mistake, and then they catch somebody, it goes to court. Well, what if that person now goes free because of your mistake, because you fell to that pressure? So that's why you just have to block it out the best you can and push forward. But it's not easy, and there is a lot of pressure, especially in something this high profile.
Peter, what do you think?
Yeah, no, to tag on to what Thomas said, the pressure is coming from above. The agency that you work for, agencies that are involved, are getting pressure from the media, are getting pressure from the family, and are getting pressure from those above them to solve this case. And again, as Thomas said, we cannot afford to make a mistake. Let me just say one thing about the families. This is a great situation to show the value of a victim advocate, that person who is the liaison between law enforcement and the family. We cannot share with the family every bit of information, for fear that they may go public because of whatever. So, again, we feel for the families, but we also have that job to do. And it's that very fine line between what we can let the families know and what nobody needs to know until we get to that arrest.
There's obviously been a lot discussed as far as the communication between all of these parties that are in play here. And I'm talking about, of course, the victims, starting with the victims' families, and they just wanting justice, and really more than justice eventually, but answers to begin with. Of course, then you have just the public. You have detectives and the investigators that are working this case, and then you have reporters like us that are prodding for questions to, of course, make sure that we have something to report on a daily basis. I want to ask you both this question as well. Peter, you noted it a short time ago, talking about how this is not a community, nor is this really a state in general that is used to there being high-profile crime. Other states might be different, but I can't remember too many mass casualty incidents, murder mysteries unfolding in the state of Idaho. It's just not something that is really something that is all that occurs all that often. So when we're talking about the resources available, and there's been so much made of the state labs in Idaho, so much made of the local police department, the resources, the staffing, what they have to use to actually to pursue justice in this case, the physical resources and then the manpower. Is the state, let me start with this question. Is the state lab in Idaho similar to a state lab across the country? Are all state laboratories, as far as forensics and the technology that they have available, it's not uniform. Not all 50 states have the same state labs. They're obviously all unique and all have, different amounts of funding that goes into it. But how different is it? And do you think that comes into play as a potential challenge? Peter, why don't we start with you?
No, look, the Idaho State Police Lab is an accredited lab, so they need all of the qualifications, all of the certifications as any lab in any other state in the country. So they have everything from A to Z at their disposal. The difference is they don't have the size, they don't have the throughput that a larger lab in a larger community or a larger state may have. So they reach out to federal partners. What can the FBI do? What could ATF do? What could some of these other federal agencies do to help out? And they are there. The FBI is involved. Other federal agencies are involved in this case. So to the credit of the Moscow police, the university police, the state police, everybody, they've reached out to seek that guidance and that help.
Thomas, I want to ask you a question that I actually just got direct message to me, and it comes from Ginny, and I want to read this on screen if I may, just because I only have a couple more minutes with both of you gentlemen, and I have to get to Brian Entin, who's going to be joining us here in just a moment. Question from Ginny Tranter. Do you believe that law enforcement would check the Wi-Fi device history at the crime scene house in Idaho? And she says, I'm not talking about internet search history. She's talking about like specific, just overall. I think it's a very long message and it's very well thought out, and I don't have time to read it in its entirety. But how detailed? Let me try to sum up the question from Ginny as how detailed and how granular can they get when it comes to the examination of the Wi-Fi data that came from the house, the internet connection to the house specifically?
Yeah, I'm sure they pulled the routing table from the Wi-Fi, from the Wi-Fi router. You can show all devices that have connected recently, any that are were currently connected at the time, any that may have a static IP reserved for the devices, which can then be tied to their MAC address, which you can then figure out who the manufacturer was, where it was sold, that kind of stuff, what kind of device it was in. So I'm sure that was not an initial step, because initially they're going to do the traditional forensics that Peter specializes in. But as they've been on the scene this long, I could pretty much assure you that the routing table from that router was pulled. All the information for the other devices that connected by Wi-Fi were also collected.
And following up on that previous point that I'd asked Peter, not to cut off that conversation, Thomas, as far as the digital capabilities in Idaho, I would imagine that it's similar across the board for them as far as the information and technology that they have access to as far as proceeding with this investigation digitally, correct?
Yeah, I would imagine. I can't speak for the Moscow police, but the larger departments in the state are going to have people trained in this and know what to do to collect the digital evidence. And they're also going to rely on federal partners to help.
And the FBI being involved too just makes it even that much more, just being able to use them as a resource and anything that they can do to provide technology, staffing, manpower, so on and so forth, correct? Is the FBI's involvement obviously extraordinarily encouraging. Also, though, I would imagine frustrating from a public standpoint, because once the FBI gets involved, it's pretty much clamping the door shut on any comment to the public and releasing any sort of form of daily updates or getting the PIO standing in front of reporters and providing a daily press conference or anything like that. But the FBI's involvement, certainly a good thing as far as the technology and manpower that police have and detectives have available to them in this case, correct?
Yeah, it's really good. The big thing is the extra manpower, right? They have task forces, they have regional laboratories, they can set aside other cases, have them focus on the data from this case. And as Peter said, the big limitation for the smaller cities, smaller departments is the manpower, where you can now pool the resources through the FBI to get this stuff processed faster.
Folks, we have to say farewell to both Professor Massey and Professor Hyslop. Before I do, you guys each have 30 seconds to just talk about what you're going to be monitoring from, of course, your vantage point from a forensic science standpoint as this investigation unfolds in Idaho.
So if I'll go first, I'm waiting to see some of the DNA, the biological. Sharp force injuries usually lead to the perpetrator getting hurt. I'm waiting for the DNA evidence.
Me personally, I'm waiting to see the cell phone tower data, if they can identify a different ping from a different person who's normally not in that area. From the data, it could provide leads to them for them to investigate.
Thomas Hyslop, Peter Massey, experts in their respective fields and in the world of forensic sciences. Can't thank you guys enough for joining us here on stream. Really appreciate your time and your expertise, and a big thank you to the University of South Florida, USF, our neighbors here in Tampa Bay, for, of course, providing us with a direct link to Thomas and Peter, and them providing a little bit of a glimpse as to what might be going on behind the scenes for investigators in Idaho. Peter, Thomas, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break here on WFLA Now and get Brian Entin on stream. News Nation's Brian Entin, who, of course, we had the report from at the beginning of this live stream. So stand by. We'll be right back. And again, a big thank you to Peter and Thomas for joining us. Don't go anywhere, folks. We'll be right back.
WFLA Now will begin momentarily. WFLA Now will begin momentarily. Streaming live on WFLA Now, powered by 1-800-ASK-GARY.
Nearly a month later, a killer still out there. After 4 University of Idaho students killed in the middle of the night, police facing all the pressure in the world to produce results, many wondering, is the case going cold? We're going to get right over to, folks, News Nation's Brian Entin joining us live on stream. If you've been following this story, you've been following Brian Entin, my friend, my colleague. Brian, it's great to have you on stream and great for you to be able to take some time out of your morning. It's afternoon here where you're used to reporting from in Florida. It is, of course, the morning there in Idaho. We're going to ask our moderators on YouTube Live, our social media audience. You can now use hashtag #HeyBrian, hashtag #HeyJB. Either one of those hashtags. We're going to really get to the Q&A portion of our program a little bit quicker than we normally do on this program. So start typing in your questions now. And if it has hashtag #HeyBrian or hashtag #HeyJB, we can animate it on screen and talk about this story and get a little bit more in depth. But Brian, why don't we just start with you and the very latest from Idaho? Any news developments over the last 24 hours that you'd like to share?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's been really, really slow. There haven't been any significant developments from police. Still no suspects, still no person of interest, but they insist this is not a cold case. So we're hoping that there are things happening behind the scenes that we just don't know about. The families are heartbroken, but also getting more frustrated. They don't have any new information from what we know from our conversations with them. New today, we know, the house is still a crime scene, JB. They've still got crime scene tape up, even though it's been 3 weeks almost. So, but today they're actually going to go back into the house and start removing some of the personal items that belonged to the victims, certain things that they can remove that I guess wouldn't impact the crime scene, and start returning those items to the family members. So that'll obviously be hopefully something that might bring the families a little bit of peace, but it's hard to imagine what they're going through right now. It's just like pure hell and torture with this killer still on the run.
How would you describe the relationship right now, Brian? And a lot of comments are just now coming in, and I'm going to animate them on screen here in just a second. How would you describe being a reporter on this case? And of course, you and I have covered other stories together. How would you describe right now the relationship between law enforcement and the victims' families / the public overall? Is fractured a good word as far as the lack of updates and the lack of anything that they can go on to hold on to hope that there's going to be justice in this case?
Yeah, I think there's definitely frustration that there's not more information being released, but there also does seem to be an understanding among a lot of people that they're trying to protect the integrity of the investigation, which is ultimately the most important. What they tell the media, even what they tell the families at this point, I guess isn't more important than finding the killer, obviously. So I think there's an understanding there that, again, just a hope, since we don't know what's going on, a hope that they're making significant progress behind the scenes. But they, in their latest update yesterday, they still say officially that they don't have a person of interest or a suspect identified.
And what do you make of that, it nearly being a month later? We don't have a suspect, person of interest. What's your analysis of it?
Yeah, it's pretty shocking to me. Just the murders were so brutal. 4 young people stabbed. It happened in a pretty dense area. That's something you don't always appreciate from watching the video, but when you're out there, the house is in a really packed in neighborhood. There's all houses right around. There's some really big apartment complexes right there. So I would have thought someone would have seen something. When I showed up here, I figured there's got to be cameras. There's got to be ring doorbells. You're in Tampa. Everybody has a camera. That's just not the case here. It's a small town. There hasn't been a murder in 7 years. So people don't have cameras. There's at least that we've been able to find, there's no cameras anywhere around that house. The fraternity party where they were at partying before the murders, there's no cameras there. So I think, that's made it a lot more difficult.
Let's get to the questions and comments that are coming in. We've got another 6 to 7 minutes with Brian Entin of News Nation. Let's go to True Crime with Shannon on YouTube Live. Hashtags for both of us. Do students seem more fearful for their safety right now there? I remember when you first got on the scene, Brian, and you were talking to students, and there was this tension, of course, in the air. Has it remained the same, or things starting to get somewhat back to normal, even slightly?
It does feel a little more normal. I think there is still this cloud over the town. Some of the students didn't come back after Thanksgiving. They transferred to online learning because their parents were too nervous for them to come back, or they were too scared to come back. You don't really see people walking around alone, especially at night. Women walk together in pairs. There's cases where people have added additional locks to their doors. A couple people near the house that I talked to got Ring cameras. So people are nervous. Graduation is this weekend. Kaylee Goncalves was supposed to be graduating this weekend. She's one of the victims. This is normally a happy, fun college town. And you definitely you go out to eat. People are talking about this. And people know the victims. The victims worked in different restaurants. So I think this is just hitting everyone still really, really hard, especially because they don't know who did it.
Let's go to this one from Richard. Richard's up next. Again, use hashtag HeyJB or hashtag HeyBrian for the next 5 minutes, and we can take your questions to Brian Entin, who's on the ground there in Idaho and who's been covering this story for the last couple of weeks. Richard says, are police considering that this is a Danny Rolling type killer, a stranger who may have stalked the house from the woods, and how concerned are they for the students? So as far as this, you've done a lot of reporting on whether or not this is a targeted incident. Of course, Danny Rolling referencing a serial killer sort of situation. What do we see for this question from Richard?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question. They continue to call it targeted, but they say they don't have evidence to narrow down who was the target. I think that's another big fear here. Like, people are questioning, was it really targeted? Could it have been random? I think police have been walking a fine line because this is a college town and they don't want to just freak everybody out. But at the same time, like, it's pretty clear, at least if they're being totally, open, that they don't know very much. So I think it's possible, but the technical verbiage used by the police right now is that it was targeted, but they're still investigating to figure out who was the target.
We're getting a lot of questions about the food truck and the food truck component to this. Patty wants to know, #Hey Brian, were you able to talk to anyone who was at the food truck that night?
So we've been trying, we've been trying. I mean, I guess I'll just kind of leave it at that. There's a couple people that we have tried to make contact with, even, gone out and knocked on doors and that kind of thing. People are not talking that are closely connected to this. I don't know why. I mean, in some cases, I know the police and the FBI have specifically told people not to talk to the media. So that part has been difficult, but we're definitely trying behind the scenes.
Michelle, this is just a point of observation from Michelle, Brian, and I have to bring this up. 6 people in a house, but 2 weren't harmed at all. Makes no sense. Especially, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we're talking about the first floor and the third floor. Can you explain the floors one more time? Because I know that of course, we had 2 on the third floor, correct? That was part of your report recently?
Yeah, so it's a 3-story house. The victims were found on the second and third floor. The survivors were on the first floor. And, there's been reporting about people who lived in the house previously on the first floor saying that you couldn't hear, anything happening on the second and third floor. And the way the layout is, like, it does seem like it would be difficult to hear what was going on upstairs. Also, like, if people were out drinking and sort of like were tired and passed out, that could have come into play too.
Let's go to Christine. This is an excellent question. Hashtags for both of us. Why hasn't there been a reward component to this case?
Yeah, that's another good question. Some family members have asked that question. I asked police that question last time I did an interview with them, which was last week. They haven't done any more interviews with us, but they said that it's in their toolbox, that they're still getting tips. And the chief said as recently as yesterday that he doesn't consider this a cold case. So I think they're thinking, like, you kind of hold on to that tool for when you need it. But hopefully that's a sign that things are moving behind the scenes, that they haven't had to go to that level where they put out a reward.
Let's go to a comment from, Alan says, have all former and current students been considered? And this is just goes to show, like, all former students, all current students, there's no investigative team in the world, Brian, you and I both know, that could cover every single solitary student. But let me ask you this. Let me kind of use this to pivot off of, there's been so much made of whether or not the names that were cleared so early on in the investigation that, I'm sure that alibis were collected over the course of the opening days of the investigation, that names were cleared. And I believe that one of the families that you spoke with as well said that the names were just scratched off that list way too early on in the process. Is that the general feeling there too? And as I understand it, those names that are getting scratched off the list, so to speak, they're not necessarily 100% in the clear, right?
Yeah, well, that was an interesting comment. He's not the first person I've heard say that. There have been other people who said, why can't they just go take every student's DNA?
Right.
And that, which obviously, like, wouldn't happen. But in terms of the people who have been cleared, yeah, that's been a bit of a frustration because they've created this list of cleared people, which is kind of interesting. Like, I've not seen that before, like, covering cases. I mean, I'm sure it's happened. I've never seen that, like, and the list would, like, grow and when they put the releases out. But yeah, they're not. What's frustrating to some of the families and the public is that, like, they're not saying why they were cleared. Like, what was the specific alibi? Was there specific evidence? So they want more information about like what the alibis are. But yeah, and you mentioned it, like a lot of legal experts say just because you're on the cleared list doesn't mean that you don't end up a suspect. I mean, you know, it could change.
Brian, my time with you has come to an end. I promised I would get you out of here on time. As far as the next steps and really your plan as far as what's ahead in the hours and days ahead. What's next in this case when we have, of course, so little to go off of from investigators, as of course they're combing through mountains, I'm sure, of evidence, still taking in those brown bags of video that News Nation got of the bags being collected, the cars being towed off the property. This is clearly still very active and still a lot of stones that are still being turned over, so to speak. What's the process now going ahead for you and your plan as you continue to cover this story?
Yeah, in terms of what happens next with the story, I mean, I wish I knew. I don't know. I mean, it's just so slow going right now. I mean, today obviously we'll be out there as police are out there again getting the personal items. News Nation is committed to staying on it. I may go home tomorrow back to Florida for like just 2 days just to kind of like refresh a little, get new clothes and stuff. And like see my dogs and everything, family. And then come back like on Sunday. But like we have a crew here all weekend long. So if anything breaks, you know, we'll have it covered. But yeah, I mean, we're just waiting. I mean, I just feel for the families. I mean, imagine, you know, what this time period is like. It's like the worst.
For folks who have been watching this story and Brian's reports, you know that snow is on the ground. I just did a quick search. Moscow, Idaho weather, currently 30 degrees, or in some areas even a little bit colder than 30 degrees. Brian, you're used to being down here with me in Florida. It's not as warm, of course, up there.
Yeah.
Just how you holding up before you go? How you holding up? How are things?
Yeah, I'm okay. It's really cold. I mean, I think it was like 10 or 12 degrees. I mean, it snowed so much last week here, which obviously, like you said, I'm not used to, but it's been good. I mean, I got like more long underwear yesterday, more socks, just because we're outside a ton, you know, obviously outside the house. So, you know, we're holding up okay, but it's definitely a different climate than you or I are used to, for sure.
Yeah, no, I'm very, very well aware of how cold it is up there. Brian Entin at News Nation. I'm sure by now our audience follows Brian, but if you don't, at Brian Entin on Twitter and really across just about every platform. Brian, my friend, it's great to see you again, and phenomenal work out there, and I hope to talk to you soon. All right?
Thanks, JB. I'll talk to you later.
All right, appreciate it. Brian Entin, everybody, who has been really leading the way on this story with the very latest across just about every platform you can imagine, bringing his latest reports on the daily to News Nation, doing a lot of work on Banfield on News Nation. If you haven't followed News Nation by now, I really encourage you to do so. They're doing tremendous work as far as staying hyper-focused on this story. I'll spend another 5 to 10 or so minutes with you on this live stream before we have to move on to some other things going on, of course, here at WFLA. I really appreciate our entire audience joining us here on YouTube, on WFLA Now, on the WFLA Facebook page, the WFLA JB Facebook page, wherever you're watching from. Really appreciate it. There's other story. I put it out on Twitter this morning. I said, hey, what stories do you want us to cover on this live stream today? There were 3 options. It was this one. The updates in the Gabby Petito, Brian Laundrie lawsuit with Bertolino being added potentially as a defendant in that lawsuit. Stephen Bertolino has not texted me back, still no comment. And then also, too, the Cassie Carly story with a massive development yesterday with the indictment of her ex-boyfriend, Marcus Spanavello. So I'm just going to spend the next 5-10 minutes just kind of going through here in the Stream Center as many of your questions and comments as possible. Any one of those 3 stories, or really any comment that you have, any question that you have on the table as we kind of just go through and parse through our comment section before we end out this live stream. My perspective, hashtag, hey, Brian and JB, please stay in this. Well, of course, Brian has been doing way more. Brian's been following this story every waking hour over the last the last couple of weeks, and of course he will be taking a little bit of a break. I think it's fair to say that he deserves a break with how much he's been doing on this story. But yeah, of course, we're going to stay on this story and any updates. Let me make this clear too. My expertise as far as live streaming, right, and streaming the news for you. If there is a massive development in this story or any of the stories that we cover here on WFLA Now, if there is that big moment, what we've been waiting for, some significant development, I'll be live. And if there's a press conference that we have access to with an update, we will carry that live. That is very much at the core of what we do here in the Stream Center. If we have a feed of something, we're going to take it live for you and make sure that you have access to it. So if there's news that comes up in this story or any of the stories that we cover here on WFLA Now, and you're like, oh my goodness, there's a 1 o'clock press conference or 1 o'clock update, or we just learned this big piece of information, you might want to scan YouTube. You want to check my Twitter, because good chance that we'll be live with whatever that update is. Abby wants to know, can you sum up the Petito lawsuit going on? Yeah, I can sum it up really quickly. Give me 60 seconds and I'll sum this up, and then I'll move on to some other questions and comments. By now, you probably know that the parents of Gabby Petito, Joe Petito, and Nicole Schmidt have filed lawsuit against the Laundries, Chris and Roberta Laundrie, seeking the lawsuit in the scope of intentional infliction of emotional distress. Basically, what they are saying and claiming, and their allegation in the lawsuit is that Brian's parents were aware of the murder, aware that Gabby had been murdered, and chose not to do anything but other than release a statement saying that we hope that she is found. And the lawsuit has been ruled to be able to proceed in civil court to a jury trial in August of this year. Attempts to dismiss have been unsuccessful. Attempts to limit depositions have been unsuccessful. And just the more recent update on that story is that the attorneys for the Petito and Schmidt family are seeking to add Laundrie family attorney Stephen Bertolino as a defendant, as a third defendant in the lawsuit. As far as the chances that is successful, that will be in the hands of Judge Hunter W. Carroll right here in the Tampa Bay area. We will continue to cover that story quite a bit. And also, too, we're waiting whether or not we're going to get word from Stephen Bertolino as to what he thinks of the entire situation. It's just there's a lot going on with that as far as the potential for more information to come out with the Gabby Petito story as it gets a little bit closer to trial. Just Lister, hashtag HeyJB. Surely their phones were at the scene, and that will tell them where E+X had been. Yeah, I mean, if you recover the phone, and we know this from the aforementioned Petito and Laundrie story, when you have the phone, you have access to a treasure trove of information that can help you. And a lot of that is GPS location. A lot of that is, of course, who the person has been talking to. We, of course, have heard a great amount about the relationships that each one of the 4 victims had with, people in the area. Absolutely. And as far as that was why we had the USF forensic digital expert on, or digital forensic expert on, to be able to talk about that more in depth. Let's see. So this is, I don't even know which story you're talking about. I'm sure you're talking, considering that you got hashtag Hey Brian on here. Can you file a FOIA request for more info? You can file the FOIA request when the investigation is complete. When the investigation is finished and done and closed. So the FOIA request would go absolutely nowhere. I still have, for example, the FOIA request on the Petito and Laundrie story. And even if you did submit a FOIA request upon the conclusion of the investigation, it will take months, if not years, sometimes a decade plus, to get a FOIA request back. I know it sounds crazy, but getting information from law enforcement in that regard is an extremely frustrating and timely process. So you can't FOIA for information from an active, ongoing investigation. Regarding Jake, I don't know. I don't have the answer to that question. And I know that there have been some other questions about him in our comment section. I do not have answers. Lauren, hashtag HJB, tell Brian how much we appreciate his dedication. I will pass that along. Brian and I, of course, are always staying in touch. This is man. I wish Tammy. I wish I had this question, because we had our digital forensics expert on earlier saying, can a security/IT expert confirm whether or not the key fobs have software database that keeps track of their last entry and usage? It has been said that some of the rooms had these. And this is a great question because I'm not exactly familiar with the exact technology, but man, Tammy, if I had the USF digital forensic expert on, we could have asked this question. But it's a good one about what information can be stored and what information that investigators potentially have access to. Rose, has DNA been taken from the guy at the food truck? I don't have answers to that at this time. Chanel Perez, I think they have more than they are speaking upon. This is a scene of 4 murdered people. This takes time, and the public needs to understand it will not be solved overnight. Very true. And this is part of the frustration component that comes into play, right? And we'll come back up here on camera. So that's frustrating. 4 20 and 21-year-olds were brutally murdered in the middle of the night. And you would think that with it being the year 2022 and the amount of technology that we have at our disposal and the amount of focus that investigators are giving this case and the FBI's involvement and really pretty much the entirety of the community saying we want answers, this should be priority number 1. You would think that there would be justice sooner rather than later, but it's not that simple. It's not that black and white. This is, I think, the most noteworthy thing to me about this is that this is a college residence. I really do believe that the significant break in this case is more likely to be based on where things are and everything that I have done as far as following some of Brian's reporting and just following some of what family and what police have said and their very, very, very limited opportunities to do so. Or not limited opportunities, but their limited availability. I brought on evidence experts because I really do think this is going to come down to evidence. That's just my 2 cents on it. I think this is going to come down to evidence. I don't think that somebody is going to all of a sudden develop a conscience and come forward and deliver the big piece of information. It's been nearly a month since this happened. I think that let me put it this way, not to say that won't happen, but I think the best opportunity for this taking the next step to identifying a person of interest or a suspect and to proceed with bringing that person potentially to justice is through evidence. And that's why we began this live stream with digital evidence experts, or a digital evidence expert and a physical evidence expert. We had one of Florida's most recognized crime scene reconstruction experts on, as well as a digital and cyber crimes expert on to answer questions because, look, evidence is going to be key in this investigation going forward. And you're right, Chanel, it will not be solved overnight. It might take many more weeks for them to process all of this evidence and actually yield, investigative results from that. Lisa wants to know what happened in the Cassie Carly case yesterday. Yeah, so this is interesting. Marcus Spanavello, the ex-boyfriend, has been indicted on abuse of a corpse. But why not indicted on murder? Well, you have to follow the evidence. So, and the charge is going to tell you the story. Investigators at this stage likely have enough to go on that he was involved in the burying of Cassie Carly's body at that barn, on that farm property, in Alabama, in central Alabama, but they don't have enough evidence yet to charge him for being the person responsible for her murder. So it's that has been we're talking about, it's so interesting. The three stories that we're talking about, they have a link, right? And the link is that, talking about Petito, talking about Cassie Carley, and talking about Idaho. All three stories, people have desperately sought updates and clamoring for information and wanting there to be a very speedy process. But all three stories point to the same thing, and that's you don't just get results like that. It's not that simple. All of these individual cases have their very, very deep complexities in different ways, and it's just going to be a very long process. In the world of social media and in the year that we live in, as far as it being now 2022, nearly 2023, people are used to there being immediate satisfaction. You don't have to go to Blockbuster anymore to rent your favorite movie. You get it in 4 seconds on Netflix or on whatever service. People are used to immediate satisfaction these days. It doesn't necessarily, even though there's been tremendous advancements in the technology that powers these investigations, and of course, so much experience that has been gathered over the decades on people who commit crimes, it's just, it's not as simple as just getting results in days or weeks. Sometimes it's going to take months. And all of these stories took months. Finding Brian Laundrie took months. Marcus Spanavello and getting to the point where he's been indicted on a charge has taken many months. This story might take months to get results. The problem with this story is that we have a killer on the loose, and there is more of a sense of urgency with this. Marcus Spanavello was taken into custody. Not saying, of course, he is a suspect in the case. He was brought into custody relatively early on in the entire process when he was found in Tennessee. Brian Laundrie, of course, we would find out later had committed suicide sometime in the month of September before his remains were found in the Carlton Reserve. This case has just a tremendous sense of urgency because 4 students were savagely killed in the middle of the night, and the person responsible for that is out there somewhere. And you've heard family members talk about how it's about limiting this pain as much as possible to ensure that there's no more future victims out there. Going through, a lot of comments. No. Sashley says, is a motive required for making an arrest? No. Motive certainly helps prosecutors prove their case when you have a motive, but not all acts of evil have a motive. I get this question a lot. Diana wants to know, did anybody watch the Gabby Petito made-for-TV movie? What did you think? I'm just going to say I haven't watched it, and I don't have plans to. Maybe I'll take one more. Yeah, Rose, the gap in the timelines are really big to me, really are. #KJB, how do we not know yet where Ethan and Xana were after being at the frat party? Yeah, the gap in the timeline is so telling, is it not? And I guess there is always the chance that investigators have pieced that part together yet and are just not releasing it to the public because that's information that perhaps is only known to the killer or somebody that has a connection, relationship, some knowledge of the killer. But man, a gap in the timeline like that and not being able to piece it all together. Brian spoke about it beautifully when he said, look, it's not, I think what he was implying is it's not a super high-tech community where everyone's just got Ring doorbell cameras. And everyone's, there's security cameras on every street. It's just, it's not that type of neighborhood. And so that makes filling in the timeline so challenging. I remember, I remember previous cases where people have been able to do, like on Reddit, like time-stamped timelines. I mean, some of them down to the minute as to what was happening in a particular story. There's a lot of big gaping holes in this case. There are. LV, all 3 cases have been murder mysteries. Yeah. Elizabeth, #KJB. It's heartbreaking, and I understand the frustration, but yes, 1 homicide investigation can take a while, but 4, it's so sad. Yeah, I want to get back to what I was talking about earlier. The big thing for me in this case, the number one thing that stands out to me as far as the crime scene, and we talked about this earlier in the stream, so I'm revisiting this, I'm rehashing this. But the biggest thing that stands out to me is that this was a college residence. Do you remember being in college? When I was in college, I was over to so many other dorms or apartments or residences. I was visiting people that I didn't even know who there were times I would find myself hanging out with people. I didn't even know who owned that place. That's just kind of what happens at college. In college, you find yourself, you'll bounce around from house to house or dorm to dorm. And so if you're a forensic investigator, you're thinking this is the worst possible scenario, because you can get all of these various strands of hair. You can collect, you can collect physical objects, DNA samples, all of these different things over the course of the evidence gathering process. And you can process 8 different DNA samples, 8 different objects, and get 16 different DNA profiles. Because especially from like a living room, a common area. Now, a bedroom, that provides a little bit more hope, right? With this happening in the respective bedrooms on the property. But the amount of people, and I'm not even talking about even currently, but with college dorms, usually people are moving in and out year to year, semester to semester sometimes. So the amount of people that have been in that bedroom over the last, let's say, 6 years, I'm sure that somebody who is a forensic examiner or a forensics team that is going to do evidence gathering, they're going to pick up everything that they can in that house. And you might be picking up stuff from months or years back from the previous occupants of that residence. So you're talking about a myriad of problems when it comes to that process, because you might get a hit on a DNA profile and you find out, oh my God, we just collected a hair strand from a person that was in this room. And then you find out that they graduated, 3 years ago, haven't been on the property in 3 years, and they have zero connection whatsoever to the case. Of course, you have to rule that person out, but still, it just makes it, I can only imagine how frustrating it would be for a forensics team to piece it together when the evidence can be so many different people. Stephanie says, in response to Rose West, that's where technology could help with taking into the phones and seeing where they were location-wise. Zen says, yeah, I had the same, really, I mean, the college experience for most is very, very similar in that regard. You go from place to place. You're meeting people. It's college. A lot of it is studies. A lot of it is hanging out and partying with friends and enjoying life. And you'll find yourself at different frat houses or sorority houses, and yeah, that's college. Nevin, I don't know the answer. This isn't, look, how the killer entered is a big deal because there was no signs of forced entry or no signs of broken glass or a busted open door or a massive question. Why the 4? Why were 2 others spared in the house? Massive questions. Folks, the time is almost 1:30. I have to get going, unfortunately. I really appreciate the University of South Florida for their involvement in this live stream. I really appreciate Brian Enton bringing in, of course, not just for joining us on stream, but everything that he's been doing over the last couple of weeks. When, of course, a story like this, a tragic story like this unfolds, Brian is truly superb at breaking down what we need to know about the story itself and combing through the information, and then also digging for additional information. He's terrific. And then, of course, let me make this clear one more time. This is very, very important. Going on from here, if there's a massive development in the story, if there's a press conference, that will be live on WFLA now. And we go live across all platforms. We believe, especially in accessibility these days, and being able for you to find us and find our feeds very, very easily. So you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. I really focus on Twitter and Facebook especially. Those are the ones that we're from. As far as us connecting, it's just easiest. Instagram, it's difficult to connect. It's very image focused, and TikTok, very video focused. And those algorithms don't allow me to get you urgent breaking information. So Twitter, but you can still follow me there. Twitter and Facebook are really where I'll be sharing updates. And if there is a massive update in the story, you can bet your bottom dollar that we'll be live with it, provided, of course, that I'm working that day. And even days that I'm not working, I'm usually coming in to provide streaming coverage. People who have followed me from previous stories know that just because it's a Saturday or a Sunday doesn't mean I'm not going to be here to stream a massive press conference or a massive update on a story. So we'll continue, of course, to follow this story. We'll continue to follow the Gabby Petito and Brian Laundrie, that lawsuit that is unfolding here in Sarasota County Court. We'll continue to monitor what's going on in Florida and Alabama regarding Cassie Carley and the indictment of Marcus Spanavello. These stories we'll continue to cover, and as soon as we get any major noteworthy updates or a live event such as a press conference, we'll be live. And that is our commitment here to you from the WFLA Now Stream Center. I'd like to thank everybody who's been commenting along with us. Really appreciate it. I'd also really like to thank our moderators on YouTube Live, Michelle and Bug Love and Dina and the entire team. Thank you guys so much. Really appreciate it for keeping our comment section kind, respectful, and on track. A lot more going on WFLA.com. And of course, the very latest on this story, you can click on the link in the description on this video. It will take you over to WFLA.com, the WFLA app. I'll be tweeting and posting updates as I get them on my WFLA JB social media accounts. Farewell, folks.